September 26, 1983, Moscow time. Outside the Serpukhov 15 bunker, the Russian night is cool and indifferent. But inside, beneath layers of reinforced concrete and lead shielding, the air is stagnant, smelling of ozone, stale coffee, and the quiet hum of 120 military technicians. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov is sitting in the command chair. He is tired. He shouldn't even be there. He's filling in for a sick colleague. He is a man who trusts numbers. He is a man who trusts the OCO, the Eye satellite system. But at exactly 14 minutes past midnight, the silence is murdered. A blood-red light begins to pulse on the main display. A single word written in Cyrillic flashes with a rhythmic, terrifying frequency. Start. Launch. The computer is telling Petrov that the United States has just fired an intercontinental ballistic missile at the Soviet Union. Then the alarm changes. It's no longer just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 Minuteman missiles are currently screaming through the upper atmosphere, carrying enough thermal energy to turn Moscow, Leningrad, and every man in this bunker into a shadow on a wall. Imagine standing at the edge of the end of the world. You have exactly 15 minutes before the impact. The manual says you must report this to the Kremlin immediately. If you report it, the Soviet Union will launch a total retaliatory strike and 5 billion people will die in a nuclear winter. If you don't report it and the missiles are real, your entire nation will be erased while you sit in silence. What would you do? To understand the weight on Petrov's shoulders, we have to look at the world in 1983. This wasn't just another year of the Cold War, it was the most dangerous year in human history. In Washington, President Ronald Reagan had just delivered his Evil Empire speech. He had announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, a plan that the Soviets believed would give America the ability to strike first without fear of retaliation. In the Kremlin, Reagan-Andropov, the former KGB chief turned Soviet leader, was dying of kidney failure and consumed by a terrifying paranoia. He was convinced that the West was preparing a decapitation strike. Just 3 weeks earlier, on September 1st, the Soviet Air Force had shot down a civilian airliner, Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing all 269 people on board, including the U.S. congressman. The world was screaming for blood. NATO was preparing for Able Archer 83, a military exercise so realistic that the Soviet leadership believed it was a cover for a real invasion. The atmosphere in Moscow was thick with the scent of fear. You could feel it in the breadlines, hear it in the frantic tone of the radio broadcasts. The Soviet military was on a hair-trigger alert. Every radar operator, every submarine commander, and every silo technician was told one thing: the Americans are coming. Do not hesitate. In the Serpukhov 15 bunker, the technology was the pride of the Soviet Union. The OCO satellites were positioned in Molniya orbits, designed to look at the edge of the Earth to catch the flare of a rocket engine against the blackness of space. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was a machine, and machines do not understand political tension. They only understand light and shadow. The siren in the bunker is not a sound, it is a physical assault. It is a high-pitched electronic shriek that vibrates in the marrow of your bones. Petrov looks at the main screen. The map of the United States is glowing. 5 red dots have appeared over the Dakota Plains. He can smell the sudden surge of adrenaline in the room, the sharp, acidic scent of human sweat. His subordinates are staring at him, their faces pale under the flickering fluorescent lights. One of them is already reaching for the telephone to call the general staff. Petrov feels his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic thump-thump
that seems to synchronize with the flashing start signal. He looks at his hands. They are steady, but his mind is a storm. He has a choice. The Soviet doctrine is launch on warning. He is the first link in the chain. If he picks up that phone, the Cheget, the nuclear briefcase, will be opened in the Kremlin. Within minutes, 3,000 warheads will be in the air. He looks at the secondary data. The radar stations on the ground, the Daral and Dnieper systems, show nothing. They are blind until the missiles crest the horizon, which won't happen for another few minutes. He has to decide based on the satellite data alone. The computer is giving him a highest level of reliability rating for the launch. The machine is 100% sure. But Petrov is a civilian-trained engineer. He knows that machines are built by men, and men make mistakes. He looks at the 5 missiles and asks himself, why only 5? If the Americans were going to start World War III, would they really only fire 5 missiles? It made no sense. A first strike should be hundreds, thousands of warheads designed to wipe out the entire Soviet retaliatory capability. 5 missiles would be suicide for the U.S.
But then the voice of the technician breaks the silence. Sir, the system is showing a confirmed launch. Reliability is maximum. We have 12 minutes to impact. What if he's wrong? What if the Americans have developed a new tactic, a small surgical strike, to test the Soviet nerves? If he ignores this and the missiles hit, he will be responsible for the death of his motherland. He is an officer of the Soviet Union. His oath demands he report. His logic demands he wait. Who was Stanislav Petrov? He wasn't a fanatic. He was a man who loved his wife, Raisa, who was dying of cancer. He was a man who lived in a small, cramped apartment in Moscow. He was a man who preferred reading technical manuals to political manifestos. He had been trained to believe that the computer was the ultimate authority. But Petrov had a professional suspicion. He had been involved in the development of the software for the Oko system. He knew its flaws. He knew that the system had been rushed into service. Imagine the weight of the phone in his hand. It is a heavy, black plastic receiver. It feels like it weighs 1,000 tons. He can hear the heavy breathing of the duty officer on the other end of the internal line. Petrov looks at the wall clock. The seconds are ticking away with a brutal mechanical indifference. Every tick is 1,000 lives. Every talk is a city. He thinks about the streets of Moscow, the children sleeping in their beds, the millions of people in Europe and America who have no idea that their existence is currently being debated by a man in a concrete box.
He makes his decision. He picks up the phone and calls the duty officer at the Soviet Army's headquarters. "This is Petrov. I am reporting a system malfunction. It is a false alarm." The officer on the other end is silent for a second. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Petrov says, but his voice is barely a whisper. The next 8 minutes were the longest in human history. Petrov sat in his chair, staring at the screen. The red dots were still there. The start signal was still flashing. If he was wrong, the ground-based radars would soon pick up the incoming warheads. If they did, it would be too late to launch a counterstrike. The Soviet Union would be disarmed. He watched the faces of his technicians. They were confused. They were terrified. Some were praying. Some were just staring at the floor. The air in the bunker felt like it was being sucked out. Petrov's vision began to tunnel. He could only see the clock. Nothing happened. The ground-based radars remained silent. The missiles had vanished. The computer had lied. Petrov leaned back in his chair. He was drenched in sweat. His heart was still racing, but the adrenaline was fading, leaving him hollow and trembling. He had just won a war without firing a single shot. He had saved the world, and no one, not even his wife, knew what he had done. You would think that a man who saved 5 billion people would be given the Order of Lenin. You would think he would be a national hero. But this was the Soviet Union in the 1980s.
To reward Petrov was to admit that the Soviet early warning system, the OKO that cost billions of rubles, was a failure. It was to admit that the machine was flawed. Petrov was not rewarded. He was interrogated. The investigators didn't care about the lives he saved. They cared about the logbook. "Why didn't you fill out the paperwork during the incident?" they asked. "I had a phone in one hand and a computer screen in the other," Petrov replied. "I didn't have a third hand to write with." They reprimanded him. They moved him to a less sensitive post. Eventually, they pushed him into early retirement. He was forgotten. He lived out the rest of the Cold War in obscurity, living on a tiny pension, eating canned soup, and caring for his dying wife. The secret of September 26, 1983, remained buried in the KGB archives for 15 years. It wasn't until the late 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that the world finally learned about the man who didn't press the button. What had actually happened? The investigation eventually revealed a bizarre technical fluke. The OKO satellite had been positioned in a way that, for a few seconds each year, the Sun, the Earth, and the satellite aligned perfectly. The Sun's reflection off the high-altitude clouds over North Dakota was so bright that it looked exactly like the infrared flare of a Minuteman rocket engine. The computer, programmed to look for flares, saw the clouds and identified them as missiles. It was a ghost in the machine, a celestial alignment that nearly ended human history. Petrov had been right. It was a malfunction, but it was a malfunction that nobody had predicted. It proved that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, it is still subject to the chaos of the universe. It proved that we cannot outsource our conscience to an algorithm. In his later years, Petrov was discovered by the Western media. He was flown to New York, where he was honored at the United Nations. He met celebrities. He received awards. But he remained a humble, somewhat cynical Russian man. "I am not a hero," he would say. "I was just at the right place at the right time. I was just doing my job. I am an engineer who used his head." Imagine the scene in his small, dusty apartment in Fryasino. The walls are covered in peeling wallpaper. The smell of old books and boiled cabbage hangs in the air. This man, who was honored at the UN, is now struggling to pay his heating bill. He sits by the window, watching the Russian winter set in, clutching a cold cup of tea. He wasn't bitter. He was at peace. He knew that the greatest achievement of his life was something that nobody saw. He had kept the silence of the night. He had allowed the world to keep spinning. While Petrov was staring at those red dots in the bunker, millions of people across Europe were sleeping. In London, Paris, Berlin, and Istanbul, families were tucked into their beds, dreaming of the next day. If Petrov had followed orders, those dreams would have turned into nightmares of fire. The Able Archer exercise was happening just a few hundred miles away. The tension was a coiled spring. If the Soviets had launched, NATO would have responded with everything they had. Europe would have been the primary battlefield. The tactical nuclear exchange would have turned the continent into a radioactive wasteland within hours. The history of Europe, the cathedrals, the museums, the languages, the people, would have ended on a Monday night in September. We are all living on borrowed time, a gift given to us by a man who decided to think for himself in a system that demanded total obedience. The story of Stanislav Petrov is more relevant today than it was in 1983. We are moving toward a world of AI-driven warfare, autonomous drones, and automated nuclear command systems. The climax of our era is the struggle between the machine and the human heart. Petrov proved that the ultimate safeguard of our species is not a better algorithm or a faster satellite. It is the human ability to doubt. It is the ability to look at 100% reliability and say, no, something is wrong. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017. He passed away quietly, just as he had lived. His death wasn't headline news, but every year on September 26th, a small group of people around the world raise a glass to the man who saved the world. The OCO system is gone, replaced by newer, faster satellites. The Cold War is over, replaced by a new, more fragmented global tension. But the red lights in the bunker are still there, in one form or another. We must ask ourselves, in the next crisis, will there be another Petrov? Or will we finally let the machine have the last word? Petrov saved the world from a technical error, but while the satellites were glitching in the sky, another threat was moving on the ground. A secret group of scientists in a hidden laboratory in Siberia were working on a biological weapon so powerful it could kill everyone Petrov had just saved without ever launching a single missile. What happens when the end of the world isn't a flash of light, but a silent, invisible cough? How did a Soviet defector uncover a secret program that NATO didn't believe existed until it was almost too late? That is the story of our next investigation, Project Biopreparat, the Silent Apocalypse.